I almost did not go see this movie because of how the media was beginning to portray this. But I'm so glad that I decided to ignore the media and go see this movie. Because this may be one of the most important films that has ever come out. Like, ever. And the reason being is because it reveals what's actually going on in our world. Things that we honestly couldn't fathom are going on. Because the human trafficking industry, and even within deeper than that, the child trafficking industry is now making more money than the illegal arms dealers. Like, just think about that for a minute. That's insane. But what really started to make me really want to see this was the baseless accusations on this movie, because the media has started to portray this as a very conspiracy or right-wing conspiracy movie. The Washington Post is saying a box office hit whose star embraces QAnon. The Guardian is saying The Sound of Freedom, the QAnon-adjacent thriller seducing America. Rolling Stone says Sound of Freedom is a superhero movie for dads with brainworms. It's a QAnon-tinged thriller about child trafficking designed to appeal to the conscience of a conspiracy-addled boomer. As somebody who went to go see this as a millennial, this movie has nothing to do with politics, has nothing to do with right-wing media, and has nothing to do with religion. This movie is about a man named Tim Ballard who had to leave his job at Homeland Security because the government would not allow him to go rescue children. And the baseless accusations for this movie should cause you to question. It should pique your interest of like, why are they trying to steer this away? So if you've been on the fence about this movie and you're worried about your reputation or being perceived as some right-wing person, like, don't. Go see this movie. It's a phenomenal movie. The acting is great. And there's so many phenomenal actors in this movie who also, it's a sacrifice for them to be a part of this film, because being a part of something that the media is painting like this could be a risk for your career. So the least that we can do as an audience is go see this movie, because awareness around this issue can make all the difference. I love you.
In 1979, 6-year-old Eaton Callie Pitts disappeared on the way to a school bus stop. His body was never found, and police believe that he was killed the same day that he was abducted. During the search for him, his father, a professional photographer, provided pictures of his son to aid volunteers. Later, these photos were printed on milk cartons, posters, and projected in Times Square. In 1983, the May 25th anniversary of Eaton Pat's disappearance was designated National Missing Children's Day in the United States. Adam Walsh was murdered in 1981, also at age 6. After a scuffle with other boys while his mother shopped somewhere else in Sears, Adam was told to leave the store. He was then lured into a car by Otis Toole. As Otis drove him away from the mall, Adam panicked. Otis punched him until he fell unconscious and then strangled and decapitated him. Adam's head was found weeks later. The result of these two cases' widespread notoriety was the stranger danger panic of the 1980s.
Have you ever heard the sad stories of the missing milk carton kids? Back in the 80s, missing kids' faces started to appear on milk cartons all over the US. They thought this would be the most effective because people used milk on the daily. Eaton Pat's was the first child to appear on the side of a milk carton. He disappeared in Manhattan in 1979 when he walked to the school bus stop alone for the first time. And although the bus was only 2 blocks from his house, he never boarded it, and he was 6 years old at the time. Then there was Johnny Gosch, who went missing on his usual paper run on September 5, 1982. His parents realized something was wrong quite early on after receiving calls from neighbors that their newspapers were late. And despite his delivery wagon being found less than 2 blocks away from his house, he was never found. I go into way more details on these cases on my YouTube channel, and I also talked about more missing milk carton kids. But they stopped putting faces on milk cartons once Amber Alerts were a thing,
which led many to overestimate the number of children abducted by strangers. While early estimates stated that as many as 20,000 children a year were abducted by strangers, and public service spots relayed the perceived danger, a 1986 Pulitzer Prize expose discussed a numbers gap between the claimed number and other statistics, such as that the FBI investigated a total of 67 abductions by total strangers in 1984. This period led to the rise of knowledge about stranger danger and violence against children, but it also created a false idea of who, why, and where trafficking occurred. In the years since, social media has become inundated with warnings about tricks and traps that strangers might use to trick young women into falling to easy prey.
Hey guys, this is a PSA for all the women out there. Just be safe. I live in Arizona and I just went to the store by myself, which I never do. This is the first time I've gone to the store by myself since moving to my new location. Arizona has a lot of sex trafficking that goes on, so I'm always like have my wits about. And basically this is the second time this has happened where I've come back to my car and the gas cap is popped open, and I know that this is a tactic for sex trafficking. They always like mark your cars in some way when they know that you are a woman and you're by yourself. The first time that this happened, I knew that like I wouldn't have left my gas cap undone, but I was like, you know what, like maybe I forgot to click it in. Mine's like a push one. You don't like pull it out, you just push it. So I was like, maybe it didn't click when I did it, but I'm just so certain that I wouldn't, like I noticed it because I noticed it immediately when I walk up to my car. So it's like I would have noticed if I did it after I got gas, because when this happened, this was like 2 weeks after I got gas. I'm like, no way I didn't notice this for 2 weeks when I drive every single day. So I was a little bit spooked, but I just like brushed it off and I was like, okay, whatever. Like maybe I just wasn't as diligent this time. Okay. Today I had to go and get Halloween candy for my trick-or-treaters, and I went by myself because like everyone was at work, whatever. And I knew like I didn't want to go by myself. I FaceTimed my friend the whole time, which I think saved me. But I was leaving the gym and I looked at my car and I was like, okay, my gas cap is closed. Like now I'm aware of this because it happened to me once before, and I knew that it was closed, and I was like, I don't know why. I just noted that because I had thought of it from the last time that I had traveled by myself. I get out of the dollar store and it's clicked open. And like, I could be reading into this way too far, but like when you're a girl, you just have to have your wits about. So anyways, I was on FaceTime with my friend the entire time and I made it very clear, and I had pepper spray in my hand and like, I was very loud and I just made it like known that people knew where I was. And I think that might have played a part in everything being fine. But just existing in the world, being a girl, you have to have your wits about like that, because like that somebody clicked my gas cap open, and I don't know why the fuck they would do that unless they were like planning something. So be aware of it, and just always don't travel by yourself. If you have to, have somebody on the phone, make sure people know where you are, share your location with your friends. Yeah, I just wanted to share, keep an eye out, be safe, and happy Halloween.
In doing so, the media distracts from the fact that trafficking is not a problem for other, less careful people somewhere else, but one that happens everywhere, including in our own backyards. In order to address the problem, one must find the source, in which case, what exactly drives trafficking? In general, people are trafficked not solely because many people are vulnerable to exploitation. Instead, human trafficking is fueled by a demand for cheap labor, services, and for commercial sex. When it comes to sex trafficking in particular, pornography creates a climate in which violence and exploitation of women and children is both tolerated and tacitly encouraged. Because there is always a larger demand for prostitution than there are people willing to prostitute themselves, the supply must be forcefully recruited. Poverty also drives trafficking, as it inspires parents to offer up their children to what they assume is a better life, and drives individuals to seek work that often ends up being far different than what was promised.
I actually didn't know that I had been trafficked until I was told by another girl I was working with in porn that what had happened to me was sex trafficking. I met a guy who was about 14 years older than me, so he was in his late 20s at the time. So he started trafficking me for sex when I was 14 years old. It started just with a conversation of, hey, I can't pay this bill, or I can't do this thing or buy this thing that you have wanted without your help. And so I'm gonna have a friend and you're gonna have sex with this friend for me, and then we'll go do whatever it was that you wanted to go do. And what happened with one friend turned into 6 months. 6 months later, spending nights in a hotel room with guys just coming in and out. By the time I got to that point of being 14 and being in those hotel rooms, I had already been hurt so deeply that this genuinely felt normal. So I do remember quite a few times when either photos or videos were taken of what was happening to me inside those hotel rooms. And it just kind of became a normal piece of what was going on. It wasn't something that set up red flags. That was a way that he had groomed me beforehand in our sexual encounters when it was just he and I for those 6 months before he started trafficking me. So by the time it was happening with all of these other people.
The populations at risk differ depending on what they're being trafficked for. However, while men and boys are victims as well, most individuals identified as trafficked for both labor and commercial sex are women and girls. For every 10 victims detected globally, 5 are adult women and 2 are girls, according to a report released in 2021 by the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime. Certain groups are more vulnerable to human trafficking than others, which in the United States includes children in the child welfare juvenile justice systems, including foster care, runaway and homeless youth, unaccompanied foreign national children without lawful immigration status, individuals seeking asylum, American Indians and Alaska Natives, particularly women and girls, individuals with substance use issues, racial or ethnic minorities, migrant laborers, including undocumented workers and participants in visa programs for temporary workers, foreign national domestic workers in diplomatic households, persons of limited English proficiency, persons with disabilities, LGBTQI+ individuals, and victims of intimate partner violence or other forms of domestic violence. Essentially, the vulnerable are those who are poor, desperate, and easily overlooked. While many assume that trafficking looks like women being snatched into dark alleyways, often trafficking is far more visible and accepted than one would think. Take, for example, mail-order brides.
No man gives a more putrid vibe than a man who has leveraged economic inequality across the world to get themselves a wife from another country who otherwise they would have no chance of wooing. But I fully support the women exploiting these men.
An article on Anti-Trafficking International notes, the international trafficking of women is defined as any situation where women and girls cannot change the immediate conditions of their existence, regardless of how they got into those conditions. Often this powerlessness to change their situation is paired with sexual exploitation and violence. International marriage brokers often act as human traffickers by offering victims marriage as a viable path forward. According to a statement from Suzanne Jackson, Associate Professor of Clinical Law at the George Washington Law School, international marriage organizations have been linked to criminal trafficking in several ways. They can be nothing more than fronts for criminal trafficking organizations, in which adults and girls are offered to the public as brides but sold privately into prostitution, forced into marriage, including marriages to men who prostitute them, or held in domestic slavery. This is one of the most open forms of trafficking women into developed nations, and almost 3,000 marriage agencies have been identified in driving the industry. And yet, few seem to acknowledge that mail-order brides are essentially sex slaves and domestic servants, or how being sent to a country one does not know the language and has no money to provide any escape removes any semblance of choice, in turn echoing the historical role marriage has played in controlling women and restricting freedom. Trafficking can look like this, where an employment or escape to a better life is offered, which is known as recruitment. This process can see sex traffickers approach potential victims in a variety of ways, including pretending to be a potential boyfriend or friend, contacting them via social media such as Facebook, posting newspaper or internet jobs for ads and opportunities, or even threatening or kidnapping them. Often, false promises will be made to the victims about money, new clothes, work, or education opportunities, financial aid for their family, etc. Often, violence is used to keep victims in line. Pretending that this is a somewhere else problem contributes to the cycle of trafficking, which in part relies on refusing to address the problem.
Human traffickers do not have a type. They will target anyone regardless of race, age, or gender. These are 6 signs that someone is being trafficked. If you know these, you might be able to save someone's life. A person isn't able to come and go as they please and someone is under control of them. They are being exploited for their labor and services. They are lacking personal identification documents, or they just have their identity taken away. They are in poor health or they have been essayed or physically abused. They are fearful or under distress. They are living in cramped or unsanitary conditions. This is happening all around us, and if we recognize the signs, it could be one step closer into stopping this. Get this to the Right For You page so we can stand a chance against human trafficking. How do people even become human traffickers? I've always wondered how people got in that industry. It's crazy even saying that it's an industry, but it is. What I found is not what I expected at all. It turns out that 70% of human traffickers were victims of human trafficking beforehand. So that means a person human trafficked another person, and they moved up in the ranks, and they trafficked another person, and so on. So it's just a big cycle of people getting forced into this business against their will. It absolutely does not give it any justice, but I bet you didn't know that.
The United States is not free of trafficking. In fact, the country study by Global Slavery Index estimates that there are 1,091,000 people living in conditions of modern slavery in the United States. This equates to 3.3 victims for every 1,000 people in the country. The belief that traffickers look other, typically as immigrants or racial minorities, ignores that often victims become traffickers themselves. As in 30% of the countries which provided information on the gender of traffickers, women make up the largest proportion of traffickers detected. Or that a majority of convicted traffickers were nationals of the countries where the trafficking took place. Trafficking happens, and if we continue to look in the wrong places as to why, it will be impossible to accurately address and stop human trafficking. This, dear viewers, is where we part. This was a request that I am fulfilling, and actually it's a topic that I thought a bit about because when I was living in Hungary, I knew two girls who were radical feminists in Hungary, and one was Romanian, and she mentioned how a lot of Romanian women were trafficked to basically Italy, Spain, trafficking happens everywhere. The Philippines and Cambodia, those women end up being trafficked to China or Japan or Korea. Anywhere where there's poverty, there is trafficking. And anywhere people can afford to buy another person, they're being trafficked there. The United States is not some bastion of, non-violence and stuff. It still happens here, and pretending that, like a lot of movies like to do, that it's foreign men and that they're these bad guys, they look nothing like the guys you know, that means you're more willing to turn a blind eye when it is something that happens in your life. Anyhow, if you guys have any comments, questions, or concerns, you can let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!